You're listening to the MindPod Network. Hello, friends. Please consider supporting the It's All Happening with Zach Larry podcast by using the Amazon portal to buy your stuff at zachlarry.com, or go to the site and pick up a t-shirt, or go to iTunes and leave a review. Thanks so much. It's all happening. It's all happening. It's all happening. It's all happening. Hello, friends. Welcome to the podcast, episode 91 of It's All Happening with Zach Larry. That is me, your host. I'm so happy that you're here. Thanks for being here. And this week we have a guest on the podcast that I've been trying to get on the show since the show started, Robert Thurman, the great Buddhist scholar and mystic. Fantastic episode. I really enjoyed it. We'll get to that in a second. And just before the little intro that I have, I just wanted to put something out there. I'm not going to hijack the podcast here about the Grateful Dead, because I know everybody who listens to this podcast is not obsessed with the Grateful Dead in the way that I am, or probably even qualifies himself as a Deadhead. I know there are some who are, but most probably aren't. But I am going to blog and probably maybe even do an audio recording about my review of the documentary Long Strange Trip, because it's been highly anticipated. It's been in the works for years and years and years. It's 4 hours long, executively produced by Martin Scorsese. So expectations were really high, of course. But I did see it. I saw it in the theaters, and it was very emotional and very poetic, no doubt about that. And it's a fine piece of filmmaking, but it left me hanging. Yeah, the omissions just really rubbed me the wrong way, and I would hate for anybody to think that it's the definitive portrait of the Grateful Dead. So going to blog about that in a second, or later on this week. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the temptations of the Buddha and something that came up in the podcast. Like all great sages and saints, the Buddha, too, was confronted and presented with temptations that were designed specifically to distract him from his eventual enlightenment. Mara, who is the demon who was manifested to try to present Siddhartha with these temptations, recognized that Siddhartha was on the near to transcending his domain, samsara, the realm of fear and desires. He took immediate action. He brought his 3 beautiful daughters to seduce Siddhartha, yet the Buddha was not moved by desire and remained meditating. Then Mara himself appeared before Siddhartha as a world ruler mounted on elephants with a large army at his side, including monstrous demons wielding powerful weapons and all of this crazy, worldly, powerful stuff. They attacked the Buddha, yet he sat still without fear and meditated and remained unharmed. Mara claimed that according to the Dharma, the seat of enlightenment belongs to the greatest and only the greatest. Mara's soldiers cried out, "And he is the greatest, and I am his witness." Mara challenged the Buddha, but he reached out his right hand to touch the earth, and Maya Thorini, Mother Earth, appeared, and she wrung water from her hair, which caused a flood that drowned Mara's army. The water represented the good merit accumulated by the Buddha. The Earth Mother herself spoke, "Bless him, her, who sits on the axis of the world, for only one can transcend time and space if one is immovable." So all of these things, and if you also go on to read about the temptations of Christ, which are very, very famously documented, you will see that these are constants among all of the divine manifestations of God that have taken form here on planet Earth amongst us. But what was really interesting, what came up in the podcast, and Bob was kind of riffing on Donald Trump and the current predicament that we're in, and remaining very, very optimistic and full of light and hope that all of this accumulated wisdom and divinity that has been going on for thousands of years is once again just being presented with another obstacle. Then I thought to myself, gosh, maybe what's going on now is just like a temptation for us. It's just like one of the temptations for Jesus or for the Buddha. And these are just tests that are being offered by the divinity side of the universe to show us how steadfast we must be within our compassion, within our tolerance, within our reduction of sense objects and discipline to maintain our resources and our love and our diligence to fix our situation. It could very well be it could be possible, right? Nobody really knows. Since all of these things happen over and over and over again, history repeats itself and man is sometimes slow to pick up on its own mistakes. Maybe that's what these things are manifested for. Simply to present us with obstacles that we must learn to overcome. So excited to have Robert Thurman on the podcast. He really is one of the great masters of Tibetan Buddhism presented into a Western context. Time magazine chose Professor Thurman. He teaches at Columbia University in the Department of Religion of Indo-Tibetan Buddhist Studies in 1997 as one of the 25 most influential Americans. And they say he is a larger-than-life scholar activist destined to convey the Dharma, the precious teachings of the Buddha from Asia to America. But it also so happens, very interestingly enough, that Bob's wife of, over nearly 50 years now is Nena, and Nena's previous husband was Timothy before that. And so there's a little bit of a connection there. They met at Millbrook right after Nena separated from my dad after the disastrous trip to India. And fate occurred, and they've lived happily ever after all this time later. Really a fantastic story, and Bob is just a fantastic mind and a fantastic character, and we had a really, really great conversation. His new book is out right now, and we really urge you to pick it up. It's called Man of Peace, the illustrated life story of the Dalai Lama of Tibet. And it's very, very cool, somewhat like graphic novel format story of the Dalai Lama. So check it out. Our conversation here did talk a lot about Dharma, talked a little bit about politics, talked about the juxtaposition of enlightenment in the Buddhist context versus enlightenment in like the yoga and the bhakti context, and so many things, just kind of the general progression of man and where we're going and what to make of the situation. And we talked about the Dalai Lama too, and how he sees that situation resolving itself very positively, I might add. So I was really, really happy to hear that. Pick up a copy of Bob's new book. He's fantastic. I'm so psyched and thrilled that I finally got to do this podcast. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. In the middle, though, I do want to say there are kind of like a few blips and bleeps from Bob's phone as it's coming over Skype. But it's not a big deal, just so you know what they are. Enjoy. Bob Thurman, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Zach. It's great to meet you.
Yeah.
After a long time.
After a long time.
Grown up. But no gray hair at all, not a bit. It's nice to see that. It's nice to see a younger person.
Well, I'm 43. It hasn't happened yet. We'll see.
Right. Age of some of my older kids.
But I feel okay about aging. But let's talk about, just start off talking a little bit about history for a second, and just about the passing of time, because I know this year's it's the 50th anniversary of the Summer of Love of 1967.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought that.
So a lot has gone on over the past 50 years. Do you when you first started getting into Eastern mysticism and Tibetan Buddhism, all those years ago, what were you looking for then? What drew you in back then, and how is it different now?
Well, I was an undergraduate at Harvard, and although I'd already done some running away even from high school, to try to go to Cuba and so on. But anyway, I was undergraduate and I was reading a lot of Western psychology and philosophy and, so a little bit of Eastern stuff. And I was drawn toward the Buddhism. And then I lost my eye. I was married already and had a daughter, lovely wife. And then I lost my eye. And the eye loss made me decide that I better really look into that the primary aim of life should be some higher spiritual truth or reality, or really what is it all about? What's the purpose type of thing? And I felt the Western answers were inadequate. And I had a sense that India had the answers that I was looking for, that there were traditions there. I didn't know, I wasn't absolute about Buddhism. I met Sufis on the way. I met Christian monks. I met Swamis and so on, but Jains. But when I met the Tibetans in India, after leaving Harvard in my senior year, early in my senior year actually, I came home. That was home. The Indians had forgotten their Buddhism, mostly.
Right.
But although Hinduism has big swatches of Buddhism unrecognized within it, but so the Tibetans still had the ancient Indian Buddhism, and I love it. And I spoke the language in 10 weeks, and it was every word seared itself into my mind, and I wanted to go into trance all the time. Luckily, I had a good teacher who prevented me from going into trance. Constantly, he bugged me and he said, no, don't meditate. You have to learn more first and get out of there. Or he wouldn't really necessarily make it a theoretical thing because he didn't do things that way, that particular wonderful old Mongolian Lama. He just said, what are you doing? Don't bother yourself. Let's go have some yoga, or let's go do work in the garden, or let's go build a temple or something. He would always, even at 3 a.m, he would catch me going into trance and interrupt it. And I was really annoyed about it. I tried to escape into the woods and meditate. He would find me. And years later, I totally appreciate it, because, the Buddhists should really learn. And then you meditate, you meditate in a Descartesian way where you think critically, and doubt, and you worry, and you figure it out. So you think a lot. And then when you really intensely do that, it comes down to a point, of deep inquiry. And then it's a good, useful point. If you just go your mind and shut it down, it doesn't necessarily help.
So given that description of meditation and the approach to it, and sort of juxtaposing it against sort of analysis and how the mind can develop an awareness, how is enlightenment defined under that paradigm?
Enlightenment? Well, enlightenment is defined as the total understanding of everything. To the absolute subatomic core, the realization of the void, which is only means relativity, though. Let's get that straight. Doesn't mean some dark, dank space. Every nihilist, materialist has a void that awaits them at death, and they get too pissed off, they blow their brains out or something, and they think they're going into a void of where there'll be no more bother. But from the Buddhist point of view, in absolute relativity, voidness means every relative thing is devoid of any non-relative essential component. And all components are relative components. So therefore, there's no escaping relativity in a way, but there's a kind of total openness of embracing the totality of it, and that's called enlightenment. That enlightenment of embracing the totality of it is it's called knowledge of a non-dual kind. Like sometimes, Zach, you know something by feeling you're one with it. I'm sure you know that.
Yes.
And then, however, if you feel you're one with a being that is suffering, that makes compassion. That makes it compassion, because you feel what they feel. And you therefore can't bear that, and therefore you want them to feel better. So that's compassion.
Yeah, but let's talk about about the space that you're talking about, though, and it's what was it? And how you sort of like in the bhakti practice, like in the bhakti yoga practice, which I'm more familiar with than the Buddhist practice. Like there is
the bhakti yoga,
like in a bhakti yoga practice, right? Like there, which I'm more part of that lineage. There's like this feeling of like of samadhi and sort of getting into, there's like there's the non-dual state, but when you meet the beloved and dance with the beloved and sort of share sort of like your pastimes and convene with the beloved, whatever you want to call the beloved, Ram, Krishna, whatever it is. There's sort of this ecstatic state that you can this ecstatic mood that you could live in. So what and the Hindus like that word mood a lot, which I've always sort of
rasa. There's a translation of the word rasa.
Rasa, right? The rasa
literally means taste.
Yes,
taste.
like the Rasa Lila or something. So
right.
Yeah. So what's like what is that state in Buddhism that you want to attain? Well, like what's the goal of like that place where you want to be? How does it feel?
Well, I mean, I don't claim to have attained it fully, so, I'm not sure.
But you've had taste.
Actually, also, it's inexpressible. We just have to start with those caveats. So therefore, we can talk about it.
Right.
Fear.
But you've come up across it, though.
I think the key thing about the emptiness thing, which is the essential Buddhist one, is that enlightenment is compassion as well as wisdom. The wisdom produces the ecstatic state because the ecstasy comes from leaving, from letting go of everything. Like ecstasy is a letting go, the ecstasy of union with Krishna, for example, for a Bhaktivad a Bhaktiwala is they're letting go of their normal sense of identity and they're giving themselves as a gopi to Krishna.
Yeah.
And the soul gopi, they might be male, but I mean soul gopi to Krishna. And so it's the letting go that brings the ecstasy. And then the problem is, even in Buddhism and in all of the traditions, there's a way, from the Buddhist point of view at least, of mistaking that ecstasy of letting go, which ends with seemingly everything disappearing, including you. You melt into kind of a sense of an absolute spaciousness sort of thing. Yeah. But I call that one the cheap enlightenment or the cheap oneness, although it's difficult to attain. But in itself, it's not the expensive one. The expensive one is where you do that, and then the disappeared state disappears. And you're there with beings, and it might be with Krishna, but Krishna is there with all the beings who are not Krishna. And so you're non-dual, and yet you embrace the duality of beings who don't know that, because you're not... In other words, if your state of being ecstatically one with the vast universe is a form of empty space, with even your old identity not even being there really, then no one's home.
Right.
So then when people mistake that as the ultimate thing, then that cuts off their compassion kind of. Because when they come back from it, which they inevitably do, because once there was a boundary to it, it's a relative state, not the absolute state. I mean, temporal boundary, somatic boundary. And then... once it has a boundary, it's not absolute. But then they slowly develop where they realize that it was always the case, and then it's even the case when there is an appearance of duality and differentiation, and then that appearance is always said by all of them to be like an illusion. Actually, there's a Buddhist Vedanta difference there, where the Vedantins will say reality is illusion. The Buddha never says that. He says it's like an illusion. Because even illusory reality has some reality for those caught in it. So you can't ignore them. But you see, if you think that, when I was in space, that was cool, and I'm going back there when I die, or I'm going back there at another stage or something, then you don't care that much about the world around you, and you can remain a Brahmin and forget about the untouchables. You know, whereas the Buddhist thing is more interventionist in the sense that, but not out of some moral dogmatic principle, but out of the experience that when the disappeared state of ecstasy disappears and you're back again, and then you're engaged with everyone and you want to help them. But then, of course, where it becomes inconceivable is that the Buddhahood state is not an oscillation between those two states. The total ecstasy of 100% letting go is 100% present while totally engaged, even with someone in hell. From their point of view.
From their point of view.
So that's inconceivable. That's inconceivable, right? That's inconceivable. Right. I mean, in verbal expression, because that's such a contradiction.
Well, and it's almost it's impossible to fathom. So all of these things. I mean, if you float away and if your objective is to float away and just to merge in the one and becoming nobody home, like you said, that's nothing. That doesn't, to me, I like that idea, and especially from like a psychedelic background, there's an ayahuasca trip can be like that, or a DMT trip, and there's validity there, but you have to come back whether or not you think this is Maya or not. I mean, you're here. Yeah. You got to deal with it. And you have to have compassion.
And other people are here, too.
Yes, they are. Quite a few of them these days. Too many of them.
Creatures, also from creatures, every animal, insect, also gods, angels, even demons. They're all there.
They're all there simultaneously, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the past and future are simultaneous, ultimately, for Buddha. But they're there in the future, they're in the past. It's all there, supposedly.
So, I mean, what's so great about, there's so many wonderful things about Buddhism, but what I love about Buddhism and its application for 21st century life is that Buddhism it's very, very practical. And, as some say, I'm not putting words into your mouth, but some say, well, it's not a religion, it's just a philosophy. The Buddha.
I say science, yeah.
Okay, it's a science.
But it is a religion for those who can't use it as a science. They can make a religion out of it, and it's not bad as a religion.
And the Buddha, what would you call the Buddha then, if it's a science?
Buddha, what do I call him?
Yeah, if it's called a science, then the Buddha is not a god, but Buddha would
primal
be...
science. No, he's the teacher of humans and gods. It's one of his famous names, even from Pali tradition. Teacher of humans and gods.
Okay.
And he's also sometimes called, early on as his father called him because of an incident in a temple, he's called the god of the gods. Devati Deva, God beyond the gods, Devati Deva. But he is not, but he meets with the so-called creator in India, Brahma and so on, who becomes one of his main fans and friends and helpers. And he meets him, and then Brahma admits that he's not omnipotent, and there's no one omnipotent being that controls and creates and is for everything. And Brahma, in the Buddhist text, is very delighted for Buddha to have discovered that, because he says, I don't mind being worshipped when people think I'm all powerful and blah, blah, blah. But when terrible things happen to them, then they get really mad at me. And I don't like that vibe. They hate vibe. I really don't like that. Right. So please tell them when horrible things happen to them that it's not my fault. I'm doing my best for every being. I like, he's a nice guy. Brahman is a really nice guy. And he's very powerful, but he's not omnipotent. And Buddha never claimed to be creator and omnipotent. We all mutually create things, and we're all responsible, therefore, in a way.
So this idea of applying it to 21st century life, and if you look at Buddhism and sort of what it believes, it's no matter what time we're living in, or no matter what time period or era we're in, or anything, we're always subject to the same limitations of the mind, and we're always subject to the same limitations of our environment. And so today, and actually this was the original question about the 60s, I'm just wondering if you feel any of sort of the idealism and, optimism, the great ideas of the 60s, if any of them made...
terrific. They're still totally here.
Yeah, you feel that.
So we just keep, and in a way, this bad leadership that we keep getting, it's freaked out about it.
Yeah, but...
do you love Sense8? Did you watch it?
Yeah, I did.
love it. It's so great.
Yes.
So, some people are like the sensates, they love each other and they want to be friendly and they enjoy things. And then there's some people who are frightened of that. And then they will try to actually write in that film, the Wachowskis' wonderful imagination, they're trying to waste them, right? So, because they want to stay in their box of suffering, of their emotional plague, as Wilhelm Reich would call it, the anti-sensates, and this corrupted sensates who join them. So anyway, I think that's a wonder. I love the Wachowskis, by the way. I'm the most Doctor Who. They're as great as Doctor Who, maybe even better. And
they're great.
So,
yeah.
What?
They're great. Very talented.
And so those ideals are here, and the incredible, increasing, ascending range of incompetent and idiocy of the leadership and self-destructiveness and anger and fear and whatever, this is a sign that those are what we all touched in those days and what lots of people did. And the younger people today still are touching, millennials and everything as best they can, given the environment, is totally winning. It's totally sweeping the planet. It's empowered by Facebook. It's empowered by the Zach Leary podcast. It's empowered by all of these things. And they're desperately trying to clamp it down and control it and cut it off and create firewalls and all their crap. And but the fact that you're supposed to be happy, you're allowed to be happy. This is a great planet. It supports life, but it's not perfect because life isn't perfect. But enlightenment is, unless you become enlightened, where you embrace it all and you just become love. Then you just love everything.
So, what are all these things then? What is because some may say that if you look at the 60s, hey, we're supposed to repair this. We're not supposed to repeat the same mistakes. How can we fast forward 50 years later and elect this crazy moron to be president if the 60s were 60s? But to me, but to me, it's sort of because, and if you look at, again, the Buddhist thing, no matter what time period you're in, we're all subject once again to the same limitations, and this is no different. And maybe this is like the temptations of the Buddha in the forest. These are this is tempting us with fear and desires and lusts and all of these things, and it's just sitting there as a test. I don't know. I mean, how can I make sense of this?
Tempted with lust. Look at those idiots. The guy's he's supposedly a billionaire or maybe half a billionaire in truth with all the loans, and he has gold-plated plumbing and he has Mar-a-Lago and hundreds of things all over the place, loans and deals, and then he goes to public housing for the first time in his life and he's got the government and he wants to make more money. So he's totally tempted by lust. So it's not that the people in the 60s were tempted by it. Actually, by being open, they were more relaxed about it, actually. And my point is that, of course, there's a vanguard, a vanguard of sensibility, of sensitivity has occurred. Keats and Shelley, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, already challenging the industrial poisoning of the planet and the poisoning of health, et cetera, et cetera. And then, the Seneca and this is only the 21st century of sort of a Roman organization of time, It's the 30th century or 28th century from Buddha, maybe, or 25th. Nobody really knows for sure. And it's hundreds of thousands of years more than the 100,000 years of the Western materialist myth about Lucy. The humans have been longer, according to our view, and beginningless, actually. So the point is, we're a grade C planet of sort of slowly violent, weird ape-like hairless apes, and we're slowly getting more gentle and more sensitive and listening to our wives a bit more. We're slowly improving. We're slowly trying to overcome the racism, racist, tribal, egotistical, maniacal things, and we're getting there. And I think we reached a really positive, that there is this idea of Shambhala, that Catholic God had the idea of the Omega point, which is like a Shambhala myth sort of idea. And it's not it's the end, putting an end to the violence, actually, with the violence sort of wearing itself out, but not adding to it, actually. I think the rapture people, unfortunately, they sort of think Jesus comes back and adds to it. But that's not the case. It lets it wear itself out, And we all have that idea, and I really think personally that that's what's happening. That's my sense. I don't go in for the Dark Age and endlessly. That is a trope in Buddhism, the Dark Age one, because it was a trope in Brahmanism.
Yeah.
Every conservative society gets itself pumped up on a myth that the future is always going to be worse than the present, and therefore hold on to as much of the past as you can. They hold on for dear life sort of routine. Mm-hmm. And, of course, that's what we're seeing. The fundamentalists elected these crazy people. Desperately, people with very rigid, fixed ideologies. The terrorists are people who get into rigid, fixed ideologies, of course, with the justification of being highly oppressed and having, poor economy and terrible, no pleasure and no fun. And we have no excuse to do that, but still some of our people do. But and they are still playing. They think they're in this world where you have to dominate everybody and beat them up, and nobody should have any fun. And they feel it would be sinful to be happy. It would be against God. It would be against the law, And it is illegal, pretty much, to be happy,
Well, I mean,
so Buddha discovered that we actually are happy. Not only that, we're made of happiness. That was his central discovery, actually.
Yeah, and to me, what you just said, that's the great connection between Buddhism and Hinduism is, the Satchit Ananda thing. The soul is eternal and full of bliss. That's our natural state.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. And some of the Hindus call it supreme self.
Right.
And some Buddhists call it supreme selflessness. Mm. And both of them have expressions of like the supreme self of selflessness or the selflessness of the supreme self. Or, it goes beyond words. So it doesn't matter. That's not such a big deal. Although psychologically, the rigid identity habit that makes people suffer is not helped at an elementary level because it's too easy to confuse the rigid, narrow, personal identity with the supreme self, because it's still called self. That's the only reason Buddha sometimes harped on selflessness.
So, okay. So I'm going to transition here a little bit. I don't want to get too crazy into the geopolitical thing, but this idea of happiness and the right to be happy. And we look at, all these geopolitical kind of forces like the United States and now China, with these big, very kind of heavy sticks about dictating happiness versus economic structures and all of these different things. And China, this once great mystical land, is newly minted in a global economic sense, and that their economic powers are relatively new, in comparison to other places. But Tibet was is right next to China, or China says is now part of China. It is now part of China. It is now part of China, yeah. So how, given all of that, what do you think that is going to do to the legacy and the future of Buddhism and the next Dalai Lama and all of these things? Where does that sit in this modern world?
Well, if you read the book, I think, or you have the book of the Man of Peace, the illustrated life story of the Dalai Lama of Tibet. And it ends in the present, which is a very bad situation of Tibet, because Hu Jintao, the previous president of China, was made president by Deng Xiaoping. Actually, but Jiang Zemin just agreed to it.
Right.
And he served his own term, and then he put in Hu Jintao according to Deng Xiaoping's wishes. At that time, the late Deng Xiaoping's wishes, and he wanted him in there because Hu Jintao only made his name in the Chinese bureaucracy and the Chinese sort of governing Communist Party thing by being vicious to Tibetans in the late 80s. He was party boss of Tibet. He actually couldn't live in Tibet personally, except for a very short time, because he would get a headache right away. He was someone very intolerant of altitude, which is one of the saving graces of Tibet. He couldn't actually spend time there, Hu Jintao. But anyway, he started this vicious crackdown because he was upset that the Tibetans kind of rained on his parade of the Olympics by doing a big rebellion, mostly nonviolent rebellion in the 2007 and 8. And he implemented a super crackdown in the last few years of his regime, which is still, Xi Jinping has not been able to change, and maybe he won't. We don't know. They had worse crackdowns back under Mao. So they survived crackdowns. They're really strong people. And they're very fed up with it, of course, at this time. But they're also happy to be part of China if China respected them and their religion and their spirituality.
But they're not doing that.
They wouldn't mind. They like Chinese cooking. They don't mind. And they also know that the Chinese don't like living at that altitude. The actual people who go there, they're very unhappy. And as you and I are, if we try to spend more than a few weeks at 15,000 feet, we get problems, and that's why Tibet was pretty empty, although there was always a lot of extra people in China, but it was fairly empty up until 1950, 6 million people, in a huge place, bigger than the Louisiana Purchase, bigger than all West Tibet is huge, million square mile, the plateau, which is really what Tibet is. And so I think China is going to come back to its fun-loving self. China has been caricaturized by imperialism-influenced historians and sinologists as being sort of a different kind of people. They don't have individualism. They just want to follow the emperor, which is a way they define like a primitive tribe, these kind of imperialist sociologists. We, the great individualists, we, the Westerners, which is nonsense. We're a bunch of conformists, and, and we're stepping around in our uniforms, et cetera, marching around conquering the planet. But they think that we are the individuals, but actually the Indians were those sadhus, they're the individualists of all time, still, even today. Point is, China was a bit collectivist in its early phase, like everybody else, but they did adopt Buddhism, Confucianism, which is a brilliant thing. Taoism is a magnificent thing. Yeah. Your dad's book on Taoism, his psychedelic Taoist book, is one of the awesome books. That pink book, it disappeared. It should be really reissued. I don't know if you have rights. You should really. I'll publish it if you want.
Thank you.
Find papers. Oh, it's so great. You must have read it.
Yeah, sure. It's been a while, but yeah.
Those are so great. The way he sort of riffed with Lao Tzu. It's wonderful, and. So I'm saying they had that. Then they got Buddhism in early, long before the Romans, and the Western empires resisted it, although the Iranian one was very influenced by it, actually. And Mani was involved in Buddhism, Manichaeism, Mani. He mixed Buddhism and Christianity way back in ancient time. And so Chinese got into it because Chinese actually are very individualistic. They're very fun-loving. They love to have a good time. They're a little greedy because nowadays, because they got put into this sort of ascetical thing by Mao, like wear blue pajamas and give me all your jewelry so I can melt it for the stage, and work, and kill all the birds, and really terrible, destructive stuff he did. But the point is, there's hundreds of millions of Buddhists there, and even today, Communist Party members are Tibetan Buddhists even, and their Buddhism is massively enriched. Because Tibetan Buddhism has been all over the place there. They actually love the Dalai Lama in truth, underground. And they go crazy in Taiwan and places where they're free to express themselves. And China will see a huge renaissance, I think, very soon. Communist Party will hopefully get out ahead of that. I think Xi Jinping is getting out ahead of that, personally, the present president. And they will, when they get rid of these old frightened gangsters, who are like, we got to hold on and control everybody. When they get with the bad PR advice, their bad definition of soft power, and they realize if they want to have their own Chinese Michael Jackson, they have to loosen people up from youth.
Well, you paint a fascinating picture, and I really want to believe you're right. I really do, because I think and the power of like the faith and the power of like that tradition of Tibetan Buddhism is so, it is really powerful. And I think that there is a lot of kind of inherent sort of equity that comes from these ancient traditions, that because it's lasted so long and so many generations and so many thousands of years, that it's fundamentally made it into our DNA. And I think you can't kill these things.
You can get rid of human heart.
Yeah, I mean, and just the nature of compassion and the the nature of joy, and all of these things. Yet, I do sort of worry a little bit, and this is where it kind of confuses me, is that China's economic growth and their plunge into the modern world, into modernity, and sort of relationship with the material items, and and their fascination with the West and all of these things. It's very, very new. And I just wonder if it's too much, too fast, and how can these ancient traditions mix with the modern world in such a...
It does.
So I'm just wondering how that can happen, and where does that...
Well, the Chinese have been mistakenly misled, let's say. First, they were beaten up by the British and addicted to opium.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
And then say it forcefully, it was like an event in history, like if you had the Colombians coming up to D.C. and shoving cocaine down the throats of all the congressmen.
Well, that's true, though. They did that, isn't it?
It is. That's what the British did in the 19th century to the remains or to the decaying portion of the Manchu Empire, which wasn't even a Chinese empire. It was a conquest empire by the Manchus. So there were two kinds of imperialists. Manchus are like Mongolians more. They are not Chinese. And they were pressing harshly on the Chinese, but then they flourished in the 18th century. But then 19th century, they got very decadent, as those dynasties do. And then the Europeans came in and messed with them. Then, in order to react to that, they were slower than Japan, but they followed and decided they better industrialize. They better go into industrial militarism. And then they got Marxism, which is a kind of industrial Western idea of mobilizing everybody, and socialist industrialization and pollution, and then modern militarism and Wilhelm Reich's emotional plague of modern militarism, and conformist robot-like militarism. So they are just reflecting back to us from their huge, highly sophisticated culture and population, which they even lost. During Mao, they didn't get educated. They didn't know what Confucius said, none of them, or what Buddha said.
That's right.
It was all stamped out of them. And now they're getting it back. And when they do, they will make a new version of modernity, of their own kind, when they finally get over the idea that they have to defend themselves from us and our nukes, and not only us, but you have to realize the biggest natural enemy of the Chinese is really not us, it's the Russians.
Right.
The Russo-Chinese have a long border. Russia is a super nuclear power. They're very, China feels Siberia. The Manchus had much of Siberia owned the Manchus, so the Chinese think it's theirs. And that's where the conflict might arise before everyone decides to bag militaristic, industrial militarism, which is totally destroy everybody. And they all know that. So that's the bigger danger. And unfortunately, we have at the moment completely insane leadership. But luckily, let him build 100 hotels in China as president, and then he won't want to bomb them.
It's true.
And let them have a million things over here, and they won't want to bomb us. And then they would not take on the Russians. The Russians won't take them on, and they won't take on the Russians. And we'll get over this idea that 20th century idea, though, to go back to the Western way of timing, the 20th century idea was power means big military, industrial exploitation of people for their resources, and dominate them with occupation armies. But actually, 21st century, what that is a recipe for is bankruptcy, poor industrial products, and miserable life. Who made the best products industrially in the world in the last 60, 70 years since the last big war that somebody thought they won? The people who lost it, the Chinese and the Germans. The Japanese and the Germans. They made the best cars. They made the best everything.
Yeah. And
we wasted all our stuff building missiles and rockets, and all our best engineers made that kind of crap until we got the internet. And so be hopeful, all I'm saying. And you know what? Listen, as far as worrying goes, join the club. I'm the worryingest person. I always, I have a thing. My wife even tells me, why are you worrying so much? And I just do. I really do worry a lot. I think bother to do. But intellectually.
But I think worrying is an offshoot of awareness, though. because I think just awareness of your natural environment, and the more you sort of refine those senses, that naturally produces worry. I think it's an offshoot of that.
I think maybe. You look pretty cheery to me, actually.
No, I'm fine.
You have a nice big smile.
No matter how it goes down, I'm fine with it. So what?
Right.
And it's funny that you said that about if he built 100 hotels in China, he won't want to bomb it. It's sort of like the kind of the twisted dystopian sort of equivalent of, FDR wouldn't bomb Kyoto because he thought Kyoto was so beautiful in Japan. So he wouldn't bomb Kyoto, but it's kind of like the same thing.
Well, by the way, this reminds me, there's one thing I want just to bring up to your audience, and maybe someone will have an idea. One of the other reasons they didn't bomb Kyoto is because there was a Russian count who was a Tibetan Buddhist teacher named Nicholas Roerich. I bet you've heard of him. He was a great painter, and his paintings now are very, very valuable, of landscapes in Tibet and mystical paintings of Western saints. He was a Russian mystic, but he was also a Tibetan Buddhist, and fantastic linguist and everything. My original teacher knew him. Nicholas Roerich has a beautiful museum which was his old count mansion in Moscow, on sort of Museum Row in Moscow, and it's a wonderful place.
Oh, wow.
And some thugs are trying to rob the paintings, and they just grabbed the museum. And the reason I thought of it is that a symbol of like three little, look like little persimmons or pears. It looks like that Zen painting of the three persimmons, but it isn't persimmons. It's like seed pattern, And he would go, and he got people to accept that in different militaries and different governments during the war too. And he went and put on the roofs of culturally significant buildings wherever there was military conflict this symbol, and then that was not to be bombed.
Oh, wow.
And the Pentagon and whoever the other people, even the Germans, I think, the Japanese, they all kind of agreed to this a little bit, but mainly we agreed to it, the Western Allies did. And therefore, some places we didn't flatten, like we did flatten Tokyo, but not Kyoto.
Right.
You see, because he went and put the symbol. And now the thugs, the oligarchs in Russia are trying to destroy his museum, and they keep writing me, can't you write a letter to somebody? Ask Trump to save the museum. And I don't know how to ask Trump, and I don't know what to do. I guess I'll write him a letter, but maybe somebody in your audience will think of something.
So, listeners,
they're begging me from Moscow, because I love Moscow. I love the Russian people. They're wonderful. And but I don't like any oligarchs. Our oligarchs or their oligarchs. But I do like them. But you know what is about them? Why are they dominating us still? You mentioned about from the 60s. Because those billionaires are more miserable than we are. We don't have $1 billion. We don't have to worry about losing 10 million in 15 seconds because some blip in the stock market. We can relax a little. I mean, we don't want to be absolute shit poor, but we are much less miserable than them. And also, it has to do with their internal neural, their emotional armoring, their rigid internal sense of identity. They can't feel.
Lack of vulnerability.
They have trophy wives because they don't really feel. They can't have the Reichian orgasm of the brain and all this kind of thing. So therefore, since Goldwater, which is mid-60s, they've been scheming to power and to destroy all the sensates. And they're losing. And actually what they really want, for example, our current president, if he would come to my spa and he would have a Tibetan massage of a certain kind, Reichian therapy, we're all thinking, it doesn't have to be my spa, it could be anybody's good spa in California, he might actually melt down a little bit and might become content with what he already has. He might be, Melania might be relieved of whatever his constant frenzy is.
Yeah.
His children might take a break. In other words, these people are using the levers of an old-fashioned dominating order of government and so forth because they don't know what else to do because they're not happy. They talk about it. If we're celebrating Summer of Love, it was a lot of sad things. Many people had really bad trips. People wrecked themselves or got bad health. It's wild and uncontrolled. But many people, felt the reality of their heart. They fell in love with something, with the world. And then the lucky ones reintegrated somehow. Because around them there were shopkeepers, people who were selling them toilet paper and stuff, who were looking on with a mixture of envy and fear and also desire. But then they couldn't break into it, so then later they reacted in a horrible blue meanie sort of way, to use that Beatle expression, the yellow submarine.
The blue meanies.
So my point is, let's not despair. And of course, I'm just trying to cheer up myself. Don't worry.
Yeah, of course. It's great to hear yourself say it. So where does this... I'm
hoping that China finds its Buddhist thing, which it has found actually strongly. And a few hundred million can be Christian and a few hundred million Muslims. They have so many hundreds of millions, they can do whatever.
Right, exactly. 100 million there, 100 million.
They're just always tolerant. The Chinese never had major religious conflict like Protestant, Catholic, Albigensians, or burn the ladies, who know how to cure the common cold with the herbs,
So where does where does this leave room for where does this leave the Dalai Lama in the modern world? I mean, we have the current Dalai Lama, but what about the next one? Will there be a next one? Is there a place?
Sure, of course there will. There's infinite Dalai Lamas. The Dalai Lama is just one institution recognizing one emanation of the Bodhisattva, of the infinite compassion of all Buddhas, which are infinite in number and are always present. When you become a Buddha, apparently, I hope, you're present in all moments of time, past, present, and future. So all the Buddhas are all here all the time in subtle form. And so he's just an institution of that, and he's embodying and exemplifying. But there are many emanations of Avalokiteshvara. There were emanations in America today. They were there in the 60s. They were there in the 40s. They've always been there, and everywhere. And, because compassion is the Buddha's insight is that since happiness is the fabric of the universe, bliss, that is, nirvana, is the main reality of the universe, then compassion is the greatest, most powerful energy of the universe, much more powerful than hatred, envy, greed, this kind of thing. It is the transmutation of lust, mixture of kind of lust and hate, but it uses those deep energies in a creative and loving way. And so not to worry, But they're definitely Dalai Lama. This whole silly thing that the communists are doing, that we're going to control the Dalai Lama, we're going to have the next one, like they have a pension Lama, that's just bad soft power projection. The reason they had a pension Lama was they wanted him to be a puppet. And then their last pension Lama was not that cooperative, because Tibetans are even more individualistic. They're nomads, on some part of their personality than anybody. And but so are Chinese and Indians. There's nobody who is an individualistic, actually. And there will be another Dalai Lama. He will find his own place. He would like to remain Tibetan because of the special history of that institution, but that can only happen if he goes back there before he passes away. And they will invite him back, I think, if they get a good soft power. Look at Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
He's beloved within China, actually, except for some people in the elite who are frustrated by him, and the gangsters who don't like him because he's not listening to them, and he's trying to do something different. But the foreign people don't like him. They all think he's going to be the new Mao. He's too powerful. We were getting along with those other people. We thought, but actually, so how could he get really good soft power? If you were a really powerful head of China, president who didn't have to worry about an election, and you had total authority there, and then you want to be popular because you want your one belt, one road. You want to be able to take a nice, elegant train from Beijing to Paris and back, on an excursion, and you want everybody to be able to do that. And then, of course, you're going to make money on that, right? But then China will make money on that. So if you want that, but you need popularity to do that because they're afraid of you. They're not going to want a bunch of railroads coming in there because they don't know what you're going to bring. You go hug Dalai Lama. Give him a big hug. And he gives you a hug. And then you say, oh, look, Tibetans love Buddhism. I like Buddhism too. okay, you guys go up there and do Buddhism. We'll sponsor you. We will give you internet access. We'll let you do teachings in Tibet that will reach the world. We will break down the firewall. We'll let our own people do this and that. We're not going to have people coming and doing violent revolutions, but we will have peaceful, exchange with the world. You'll see we don't have to close. We're not scared of you. Don't be scared of us. I promised Xi Jinping his own Nobel Peace Prize. Instantly, if he does that. Soft power, he would have it.
So you saw this, I'm positive you did, the John Oliver Dalai Lama interview.
Yeah, I loved it.
It was great, right? Great? It was great, but it painted that picture, and what you just said is something a little bit different. And I had to watch it a couple times to really kind of get the intricacies of it. So the Dalai, he needs to return to Tibet in order for there to be a natural secession. What China is currently putting up as the next Dalai Lama is not accurate.
Yeah, China says they're going to recognize the next Dalai Lama.
Right, but that's...
Like they recognize the Panchen Lama. But their Panchen Lama is not recognized by the Tibetan people. So it doesn't do them any good.
Right. So
the previous Panchen Lama was recognized by the Tibetan people, and he did some stuff for them, but he also challenged them a little bit, and then they got annoyed with that. Hu Jintao probably offed him, actually.
So will His Holiness return to Tibet then?
What? Yeah, there will be a return, I'm sure.
Yeah.
In Dalai Lama's life, I'm pretty certain it would be really, if China, you notice how the Chinese are hiring good architects, they're making good bullet trains, they have infrastructure that makes us look pathetic, their airports. How come they're not going to finally get some good public relations advice? Public relations advice would tell them that you can't go and beat someone over the head and then say, now I want you to love me. It just won't work, or beat somebody else over the head and put them in some gulag and then tell the people, the next people next door, oh, I'm not going to do that to you. Then they won't believe you. And the Taiwan problem they have,
Yes.
So if they got decent public relation advice, 21st century public relation advice, they would start being nice. To someone they already in their power.
So that the conventional wisdom sort of indicates that. I agree, and especially in the modern sense of how we disseminate imagery, and the modern sense of how we disseminate, no image can be escaped right now. So you can't hide from it anymore.
Yeah. So it's a matter of when. And we've been waiting 60 years.
Right.
And, we can wait longer. And His Holiness, when a guy here, Joe Donahue, a radio guy here, told me he had an interview with His Holiness about 10 years ago. I love Joe Donahue. And Joe Donahue said, he asked Dalai Lama, well, what do you want to see done is so far from what's happening? What's your attitude? How do you react to the way the Chinese are behaving so harshly? And the Dalai Lama looked at him, paused a moment, and he said, wait. And I think he meant Joe had to wait, and he was waiting. You all have to wait.
Well, in this modern, this modern conundrum that we're sort of finding ourselves in, and the Dalai Lama finds himself in right now in this 21st century sort of scenario here. So it feels like maybe this Dalai Lama is almost different than the others in that he's more than just a deeply spiritual, religious figurehead. He's also, this is political as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, the Dalai Lama institution was always political since it was instituted in the 17th century. And it resulted in what I call Tibetan inner modernity, where Tibet basically gradually got rid of any kind of military and put 85% of its discretionary budget into monastic universities. And that's why it became such a relatively enlightened culture. Not perfect. People get upset with me. They think, I'm making it into Shangri-La. It's not Shangri-La. It never was. It's very imperfect. Tibetans mostly are human beings with their perfections and their imperfections, like us. But there were a lot of really highly developed people because they were great yogis and scientists and what I call psychonauts, what Stan Groff and I and your dad used to call psychonauts.
Yes.
They had them. They did it without. They did it with adrenochrome. They did it with the natural, hormones of the body stimulated by high yoga, tantric yoga.
Sure.
And they didn't have the modern version. And but in a way, those the ones they did have were more stable, and they developed in a certain way more holistically. So, but they also weren't in a mass society. They're hidden society, saving this ancient Indian knowledge for us, which now the Dalai Lama is the first person who's helping it go global, actually, and that's what's happening, and the movement, of which you are an heir, and is moving, and they are somehow, and Dalai Lama is political leader of leaders, and he's the one who insists on nonviolence. Jonathan Schell, I don't know if you his work, he wrote a great book from Western point of view about how war is no longer viable from a Western point of view, not Buddhist point of view, not a Gandhian point of view. And nobody wins any wars. They destroy people and countries, but then nobody's there ready to do their bidding, put it that way. So they don't win wars. And so everything is going to be cool.
So
I knew your dad. I just can't resist telling you, I knew your dad when he was a square.
When did you first? I thought you first met him in
59, 60. Oh. He had a hearing aid. I'm also hard of hearing. He had a hearing aid. Yeah. He looked at you. What did you say? A little psilocybin. Oh, tiny little bit. We'll observe that. Maybe. To qualify. It was like that.
Oh, so you met him back then? I thought you met him at Millbrook. It wasn't. You met him back then.
What?
I thought you met him at Millbrook. You actually met him earlier?
No, I guess I met him there too, but I met him before at Harvard, much earlier.
Wow!
But he didn't turn me on. He's not to be blamed. He didn't turn me on, not at all. But I knew him. The young people had their own adventures and sources. They weren't just in the psych department. And I was a young person at that time. But he was always a great guy. I always got along really well with him. I liked him.
Is it true that you met Mena at Millbrook? Is that true? Or?
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
That's amazing. That's a great story.
And he said, he was, of course, jealous a little bit.
Of course.
Because he was before Barbara and before Rosemary and so on. But he said, I was wondering when these two Tibetan refugees would meet and get together, he said, when we kind of got together. It was very sweet. He was like a godfather or something.
Well, thank you for that, and Bob, thank you for the podcast and your book, the book, Man of Peace, and
anytime on some other topic or whatever. But can we tell people, please go out and buy Man of Peace? Go to Amazon or your local bookstore. There's an ebook you can have on your iPhone, younger people, and that goes panel by panel, comicsology sort of style, Kindle style, and so. Anyway, we want them to learn about the life of Dalai Lama. One of the powerful things to help Tibet is for more people to know the story. Chinese young people, more American young people, more whatever people, California people. And so it's very, very important to us, that book. Spent years doing it.
And, of course, I'll put links to buy it for all you listeners. I'll put quick links there for you to get it on the post. And, Bob, thanks for doing the podcast.
Great.
I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Zach. Take care. So I have your phone.